Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first on the hazardous weather graphics, we've got a lot of lit up areas here. Start out right here, that's specifically for Thompson Pass, there, northeast Prince William Sound. That's a blizzard warning that goes into effect this evening and continues overnight tonight until 6 a.m. Tuesday. Look for winds 50 miles an hour with some additional snow through the pass there, so that's going to be creating near whiteout conditions at times for the overnight period. So not a good night to drive up through the pass that way. And then over here, you're just under the GE there on Anchorage. That's a high wind warning that's out through, I believe, midday tomorrow, at least, definitely through tonight for the upper hillside, higher elevations, Chugach Mountains, and the upper hillside of Anchorage for winds gusting to 85 miles per hour. And we'd seen that turning an arm today, seeing gusts to 86 miles an hour earlier at McHugh Creek, and gusty winds even down to the lower hillside, anywhere from 50 to 60 miles an hour. And then there's a winter weather advisory out for snow for the Matanuska Valley, the Susitna Valley, and also Anchorage here into the Kenai Peninsula area for anywhere from 4 to 9 inches of snow, give or take. Some areas will see that much. Some areas won't see nearly that much. But anyway, that's out for the those areas I just mentioned through tomorrow afternoon, through Tuesday afternoon. Probably the heaviest amounts will be over toward the upslope areas, or any upslope areas like the western Alaska Range there. High wind warning for the Alaska Range out through tonight and into at least part of tomorrow there. Look for south to southeast winds gusting to 85 miles an hour, and then just to the north there, wind advisory there south of the Fairbanks area in toward the Alaska Range for lighter winds. And then a blizzard warning continues tonight for the Kuskokwim, Yukon Delta, Nunivak Island areas for gusty winds and whiteout conditions. Visibility is less than a quarter mile at times. Winter storm warning continues the lower Yukon River Valley area, also the Nulato Hills, Unalakleet, Stebbins, up into the Galena area. Look for anywhere from 3 to 5 more inches of snow on top of what you've already had. And then, of course, with the gusty winds, that'll be reduced visibilities as well. And the Seward Peninsula winter weather advisory out for several inches of snow, winds gusting to 50 miles an hour, which have been reported there already today in some areas over the Seward Peninsula. And that's going to create visibilities down to a half mile or less at times. And moving on to the Southeastern Brooks Range winter weather advisory, and for snow, blowing snow, same thing for the Koyukuk Valley and the Kobuk Valley, right on up across Kotzebue, Kivalina, and the northwest coast, western Arctic coast. Winter weather advisory, winds gusting 55 miles an hour, snow, blowing snow, visibilities down to a half mile at times. So looking at satellite imagery, the storm responsible for the watches, warnings, and advisories stands out quite vividly here, moving northward from the Fox Islands up toward, but not quite, to Nunivak Island this afternoon, just east of the Pribilofs. And the front pushing moisture northward along with warmer temperatures. A lot of thick cirrus with lighter amounts of precipitation here over toward the east. Still below zero on the north slope on out to the Arctic coast. And the southeast coast, not too bad, a little bit of light mixed precipitation up to the north. And that looked like maybe some clearing down to the south. Rolling this through again, this low won't be making too much of a track farther to the north. It'll be just kind of drifting in over the Yukon Delta, so slowing down in the front, gradually edging eastward here the next couple of days, and will be much weakened by the time it reaches the southeast coast on Tuesday. Today, though, snow, blowing snow, winds 40, 60 miles an hour in gusts here occurring through the north of the warm front area back into the northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, gusts 55 miles an hour at Gamble, and kind of a mixture of precipitation here with the milder southwest winds into the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay area, and good shot of rain coming into the North Gulf Coast, or moisture there, and that may or may not be mixing with rain, but real light down toward the Panhandle. Colder air coming southeastward again around the backside of this low. dropping snowfall levels back down to sea level for the Pribilof Islands. And that should reach on down to the Fox Islands tonight, but it'll be bulk of the precipitation will already be gone, so we'll be just looking at some snow shower conditions, mixture, windier, Alaska Peninsula, trending towards snow late tonight into tomorrow. Next system there, not quite to the western Aleutians, so you're seeing a break out there. Front pushes northward, eastward. Precipitation really starts getting ripped apart by the terrain here in the southeast winds, but could be some blowing snow definitely for Thompson Pass, maybe even up toward Cantwell and those areas up to Windy Pass, and snow blowing snow back to the northwest. Looking at the forecast for Tuesday, new wave on this front moves northward, slowing it down somewhat, so precipitation over the panhandle, but improving here south central Alaska, although the winter weather advisory for snow continues, and improving slowly out here in the west. And the next system drives northeastward here across the southern Bering Sea, crossing the central Aleutians to about this position Tuesday afternoon. Gale force winds, rain to the south, snow and colder to the north, and diminishing snow, but persisting over the interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving into flying weather area, mostly IFR out here over the northern Bering Sea, Bering Strait, across Seward Peninsula, into the DeLong Mountains, and along and south of the Brooks Range here, kind of tapering off to marginal conditions off to the east. Not too bad, north slope on out to the Arctic coast, lee side of the Brooks Range there, and also lee side of the mountains here, the eastern interior. Looking pretty good, Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, and also Copper River Basin, band of IFR here with that stationary, more or less, frontal boundary, especially here, southern Kenai Peninsula, western Prince William Sound, eastern slopes of the western and central Alaska range, and a band here into the Togiak Bay area, improving out to the west, and the panhandle starting out marginal. Goes VFR, or goes IFR, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay on up to White Pass for the afternoon. Otherwise, IFR, mostly periods of into the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, again back up to the northwest here, expanding over the North Slope and Brooks Range. A little bit of improvement here between this frontal boundary and then some more stuff coming into the west coast there. With marginal VFR, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, Pribilofs, Eastern Aleutians, and more IFR with that next system pushing into the western Aleutians. That spreads eastward and covers all the Aleutians for Wednesday morning. And then we've got IFR of the western interior up to the Brooks Range, north of those mountains, though not as bad. Marginal becomes VFR, especially on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And some areas of marginal VFR now possibly showing up there on the north side of the Alaska Range, but not too bad with the IFR staying south in along the, well, across southern southeast Alaska here, North Gulf Coast. Marginal for the Gulf of Alaska. Kodiak Island can see some VFR, and it looks kind of IFR-ish there for the panhandle in the morning. And that more or less continues into the afternoon. Looks like a little bit of improvement up here to the north, and less IFR, mostly hung up in the Coast Range now. Thompson Pass over to along the Coast Range, along the mountains there off to the east, and then not too bad there over the eastern interior. And then you got an area IFR up here over central western North Slope, Arctic coast, and the Brooks Range down into the Kobuk, Selawik Valley areas, Kotzebue, and the northwest coast. Marginal VFR, Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island. More IFR here for the central Aleutians. Pribilofs, not quite to the coast, and then down to just southwest, or on the, actually the southwest coast, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula. And taking a look at the passes, Franatuvik tomorrow, Tuesday. IFR, much better though going out the north entrance, VFR, there as you head out to the north slope. Same pattern for Adigan, that southerly flow. So lowest conditions on the southern approach, probably VFR north side. And Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, and actually Lake Clark could become VFR tomorrow afternoon, and possibly even Merrill as well. We'll call it marginal, at least for a portion of the day. And then for rainy though, marginal VFR with IFR in the eastern entrance. For windy, South-north flow, so that means lowest conditions, southern approach, call it marginal through the pass, VFR north side. And for Isabel, marginal VFR, except VFR in the northern entrance. And for Mentasta, same pattern, VFR, possible marginal conditions, southern entrance. Tanita, occasionally marginal tomorrow. And for Portage, another IFR day there. Chilkoot and White starting out marginal, possibly becoming IFR later in the afternoon. And freezing levels about 2,000 to 4,000 feet here, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and then kind of slipping on down across or just off the southeast coast. And icing, south to north flow, lots, could see some considerable moderate, a zone of it anyway, here up into Prince William Sound along the eastern North Gulf Coast and over possibly to the Chugach Mountains. And then that really weakens just areas of just a thread icing here through the interior and over the southwest, mixed possible light rime icing there, or mixed icing of a light nature, and then also some light rime icing there for the western Aleutians. Jet stream. Here's a storm today, slowly pulling northeastward over the Yukon Delta tomorrow and weakening. South to north flow ahead of that, still about 90 knots up across Prince William Sound, ridging over the panhandle of western Canada or northwest Canada. 9,000 foot winds south, 55 to 60 knots here over the western interior areas, and about 30 to 50 knots here for the 3,000 foot winds, westerlies 25 to 30 over the southern Bering Sea and Aleutians, 55 knot winds out ahead of that system. And turbulence-wise, moderate yaw pretty likely here over the western interior from eastern Norton Sound down to the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Alaska Range, and Prince William Sound.
You guys got everything tied down back there? Yeah. Yep. We're going through the lee of St. Elias, so there might be some turbulence.
Fasten seatbelt sign on.
Well, who am I to tell you what to do?
There are tens of thousands of glaciers in Alaska. Some stunning cliffhangers, others wide glaciers that come down to meet the ocean tides. Some, like this one we flew over in August, are easily visible from low Earth orbit and are mesmerizing from 1,000 feet above and have trees growing on top of their soil-laden boundaries. Those glaciers, although they represent only a fraction of the world's ice, are contributing much more than their share to sea level rise. Chris Larson and his colleagues have repeatedly measured 220 of them in a small single-engine otter, measuring their height with lasers and their depth with radar, and watching them change from season to season and year to year. But Alaskan glaciers are also different. We're only just figuring out how they all behave. Data from flights like these, part of NASA's Operation Icebridge, can help fill the gaps. Chris and radar specialist Martine Trufer are both from the University of Alaska Fairbanks and both seasoned Alaskan pilots. But they rely on their good friend and legendary bush pilot Paul Kloss and his 35,000 hours in the cockpit to fly the incredibly demanding flight lines the mission requires.
And does it help you guys being pilots too?
I would like to think so, but watching Paul fly and seeing what he does, it's kind of like trying to learn quantum mechanics in kindergarten.
You know, I can fly my airplane around, but just seeing what Paul does in this extremely challenging environment in the mountains while trying to follow a specific flight line at a specific altitude above ground, negotiating winds, topography, maybe occasional low-level clouds that you have to get around, and just managing all that is just several levels above what I could do as a pilot.
Well, I think the first time I came here to this park, I was probably 4 years old with my father. I've been blessed to be able to fly in lots of places in the world, all over the place actually, almost every continent. I guess I'm always looking for some place that might be better than this, but I haven't found it.
Paul's plane is about 60 years old and is the first single-engine Otter ever retrofitted with a 1,000 horsepower engine, which makes takeoffs feel effortless and gives Paul the ability to negotiate wild terrain, which he certainly did during the first 2 incredible science flights of this campaign. And with sunny skies and relatively calm air, we covered 3 vastly different pieces of ice. While Paul fueled up the plane, Chris gave us a preview of the day's science and scenery.
So it has one of the greatest coastal reliefs anywhere in the world. So it's between the ocean and the summit of Mount St. Elias, which is 18,008 feet high. It's less than 10 miles. There's a stupendous amount of mountain right off the ocean. It's hard to beat it anywhere in the world. It might be the prettiest for me. It's absolutely stunning. From here in McCarthy, we'll cross one of the bigger precipitation gradients in Alaska too. Here it's about 10 inches of precipitation a year, and we'll go over to an area where it's on the order of 200 inches per year. So it's from one of the driest parts of Alaska to one of the wettest parts of Alaska in about 45 minutes flight time.
Whoa, that's pretty good.
That's awesome. You want to do Tyndall next?
Sure, where you want?
If the winds are calm now, might as well grab it.
First, we came to the rugged landscape of Icy Bay, which not that long ago wasn't a bay at all. It was filled with ice. Tidewater glaciers in this region can make dramatic advances and retreats as they feed on high rates of snowfall and then retreat as they're melted by warm ocean waters. Like the Tyndall Glacier seen here, most of these glaciers have retreated dramatically over the last 100 years. But nearby Yahtzee Glacier, after years of retreat, is currently the most rapidly advancing glacier in Alaska. Overall, though, the Icebridge Alaska surveys, from the Denali region in the north to the Juneau ice field in the southeast, have documented pretty substantial thinning of glacial ice. Areas seen here in orange and red show between about 10 and 15 feet of thinning per year.
1,200. There's a nice waterfall up there from the hanging ice.
When we very first started profiling this, Paul, this gravel fan in the one in the valley next to it didn't exist.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
this was
look
deep.
at all the good landing spots here.
Yeah,
There's no place to land here before.
no, it was deep water.
After covering several of Icy Bay's glaciers, given that it was time for lunch, just like that, we landed in this unforgettable spot. Flying eastward, leaving Icy Bay behind, we came to the mighty Malaspina, one of the Earth's great examples of a Piedmont glacier that spills out like pancake batter onto a broad plain as it approaches the sea. It surges at uneven intervals, creating dramatic patterns on its surface as it distorts the moraines of rock and soil borne along by the glacier. The Malaspina is less dynamic than the Yahtzee and is only melting at about the average rate for Alaska, but that could change quickly.
It has the potential for being one of the bigger geographic evolutions in Alaska. Certainly my son will be able to witness some big geography changes there. There's potential for it being connected with the ocean through some narrow lagoons, estuaries, which would take a little bit of coastal erosion, but it's not too hard to imagine that where the Malaspina Glacier is now could become a large bay.
The data that Martine's radar provides could reveal how vulnerable the Malaspina is to melting by the nearby ocean. Here we see the radar returns from the surface of the glacier, and here is something that Chris's lasers can't see, the rocky bed of the glacier, giving us both clues as to what's happening under the ice, as well as a measurement of its thickness. Finally, we came to the Yakutat ice field, 300 square miles of absolutely doomed ice perched high in the mountains. Researchers even debate how this ice field came to be at all, since in its current configuration, it's hard to imagine how it could capture enough snow to form glacial ice. And so, even if the Arctic weren't warming faster than the rest of the planet, this area would be likely to melt within a century or two. But with many other glaciers, it's easier to see the connection between a warming planet and ice loss. Thanks to data from IceBridge and other surveys, we now have a good estimate of the current rate of loss from Alaskan glaciers, 75 gigatons a year. While airborne observations over Alaskan glaciers have provided a rich record of change in the area, those efforts are now augmented by NASA's newest ice measuring tool, ICESat-2. With 6 laser beams of its own, and orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes, the satellite will carry on the record of Alaskan change. For their part, Chris and his team will continue to do their surveys for at least the next 2 years, helping to validate the ICESat-2 data and make further detailed observations over the stunning glaciers of Alaska.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at coastal water forecasts here. Full gales coming in here to the north coast. Southeast 45 knots, seas 18 to 20 feet, and 35 to 40 knot winds on the south coast. Southeasterly as well with 12 to 15 foot seas. Small craft advisories, Clarence Strait, southeast at 25 and southeast 20 Stevens Passage, but gale force gusts to 40 knots, and Lynn Canal northerlies 25 knots with 5 foot seas. Moving ahead to Wednesday, lighter winds now along the coast here. On the south coast, northwest 15 to 25 knots, seas around 17 feet. North coast southerlies 15 to 25 knots and 17 to 19 foot seas. Lynn Canal swinging the winds around at the south at 15 knots, south 20 sustained for Stevens Passage, seas 4 feet. And a little brisker there for Clarence Strait, southerlies at 30 knots with 9 foot seas. Eastern North Gulf Coast tomorrow, storm warning out. Southeast 50 knots, that blows right into Prince William Sound. Southeast winds 45 knots there with seas up to 10 feet. And then lighter winds behind the front here, south 30 knots for the western North Gulf Coast. And the Barren Islands even lighter yet, all the way down to 15 knots, seas 13 feet. Kamishak Bay southerlies at 20 knots. And south winds at 15 for all of Cook Inlet. And for Wednesday, southwest 10 knots here for northern Cook Inlet, south of the Forelands down to Kamishak Bay, southwest on the direction, speed 15 knots, seas 4 to 8 feet. And for the Barren Islands and the western North Gulf Coast, or all of the North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands, winds will be southwest on Wednesday at 25 knots, seas running around 14 feet. Much lighter winds now for Prince William Sound from what will be tomorrow. Southerlies at 20, seas subsiding to 3 feet. Kodiak Island, south to southwest winds, 25 knots with 7 to 14 foot seas. And southwest winds, Sitkinak to Castle Cape, 25 knot winds there. Alaska Peninsula, west winds 30 knots, both sides of the peninsula with seas at 16 feet. And Bristol Bay, southerlies at 30. And then for Wednesday, those southerlies at 30 will become southeast at the same speed there on Wednesday for Bristol Bay. That'll extend all the way down to Cape Sarachev on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. South side, southerly gales, 35 to 40 knots from Cape Sarachev all the way up to Sitkinak, and then up the east side of Kodiak Island, Fognak Island, southwest 25, and lighter winds from the south in Chillicothe Strait at about 15 knots. Fox Islands, Unalaska Island, west winds 30 knots. Sumac Island, west 25. Small craft advisories either way there with seas running 14 to 18 feet or 17 feet. And southeast winds, Adak and Atka, with 15 to 20 knot winds there. And then winds increase to 35 knots over the western areas. Those will swing around to the northwest at 40 knots here from, say, Shimia to Kiska in toward Adak, northwest 50 knots, especially on Chitka Island. Adak and Atka, southwest 40, seas 13 to 27 feet, and then 30 to 35 knot winds from the south-southwest for the Fox Islands. Southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, southwest 30 knots, northwest 30 along the Yukon Delta coast, north 30 for St. Matthew Island. Pribilofs, westerlies at 30 knots, seas 14 feet. Gales, St. Lawrence Island out of the north, 35 knots. That goes down under gale force, crosses the threshold there to brisk wind advisories for St. Lawrence Island, 30 knot winds for the northern Bering Sea. Northerly gales for the Pribilofs, and northeast 30 there for Kuskokwim Delta coast, lighter northerlies at 20 for the Yukon Delta coastline. Beaufort Sea, east 25, brisk wind advisories, all areas there, turning northeast central coast, increasing the gales from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, and then Cape Thompson south to Wales, north at 30. Outlook for Wednesday, northwest 30 from Wales up to Cape Thompson, Cape Beaufort, 25 knot winds, brisk wind advisories there, coming down to 20 knots on the west side, but central and east coast, all northeast or east-northeast at 25 knots. Looking at tonight's weather again, blizzard warning for Thompson Pass tonight, and winter weather advisories for the Matanuska, Susitna Valley, Anchorage, and portions of the Kenai Peninsula for tomorrow for 5 to 9 inches of snow. High wind warning out tonight for the Anchorage upper hillside area for gusts 85 miles an hour. Blizzard warning and winter storm warnings extend from the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta up into the western interior, with a blizzard warning continuing for St. Lawrence Island. That all starts to improve tomorrow. The front pushes eastward here. Starts to weaken a little bit, but still enough gradient with a high over Canada to keep the gales in over the Panhandle, but better conditions in the next storm pushing in on Wednesday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.